Every choice you have made has led you to this moment.
There are many things to love about the climatic final duel of the Clone Wars Season 7. The beautiful animation, the heart-gripping story tension, the seemingly god-tier lighting, the list goes on. However, one of my favourite things about the fight is actually how it's debatable on who won the engagement. Both sides have legitimate cases depending on how you look at it. I hope to be able to present these cases to you, give my opinion, and then let you, the viewer, decide who truly won this battle. So with that out of the way, let's get into it. The early duel starts off with Maul charging forward and leading the fight. This is in character with his fighting style, the 7th form of lightsaber combat, duel, otherwise known as the ferocity form. The goal of this style of fighting is to create chaos in a fast-paced, high-octane fight with erratic attacks. This is in order to throw your opponent off balance and create an opening for the user to savagely end the engagement. However, Ahsoka is no stranger to high-octane fights. Her whole fighting style, which is Form 4 Ataru, is built utilizing agility and dexterity to outmaneuver your opponent. So while initially she is on the back foot, she is able to keep up with Maul for the most part, leading to the two of them to trade exchanges with no real advantage being gained for either side. That is, until Maul manages to successfully parry an attack from Ahsoka, leading to him elbowing her in the face. This exchange actually almost leads to Maul severing Ahsoka's hand. However, she recovers from the stun quickly enough to move her hand away from the upcoming slash. It was close enough, however, for the resulting pressure to cause her to lose grip on her saber, resulting in a disarm. Now, usually a disarm in any form of fighting really is harder than just straight up murdering your opponent. So it's considered more skillful to do and is an indication of a stronger opponent when it happens. However, in this case in particular, it wasn't really intended and was a result of a close dodge, so it's not as bad for Ahsoka as it looks. I think it's also important to point out here that Ahsoka is more than likely less sharp in this fight than she would have been before leaving the Order. The reason being it's very unlikely that she's gotten any good practice in since then. Sure, we know that she did do some basic Force exercises moderately every now and then, mainly out of habit but also because she does value her connection to the Force. Dueling though? Where is she going to find practice partners for it? Why would she even need to keep practicing it anyway as a civilian now? Hell, she didn't even have her sabers anymore, she gave them to Anakin when she left. So it's incredibly unlikely that she's gotten any practice in at all really since leaving the Order. Granted, she still does have the years of muscle memory built up from the practice and experience she had before leaving the Order, you don't just forget that, but ring rust is a thing. And so it's undeniable that she's not in the most ideal form going into this fight. Nonetheless, to force Ahsoka into a situation where she had to dodge so hastily is a point towards Maul no matter how you look at it. So you wouldn't actually be wrong if you were to say that Maul is winning the fight at this point in time. Maul then seizes the opportunity of her losing her grip and presses forward hard with a ferocious flurry of attacks, looking to end the engagement here and now. However, Ahsoka isn't really fazed by this development. Instead, she somewhat easily evades his oncoming attacks, and even finds a window for a counterattack of her own, landing a clean kick to the face of Maul, using his momentary stun state to both recover her lost saber and attack him in the same time in doing so. Maul manages to evade the attack, but from what was supposed to be a disadvantaged position for her, Ahsoka actually manages to come out ahead in the situation. So now, the fight is even again really, with no clear advantage for either side as the fight is reset. It's here where Ahsoka says this.
You're lucky Anakin didn't show up. The way you're fighting, you wouldn't have lasted long.
As a side note, I have to say I agree with Ahsoka's assessment here, given that at this point in the story, Anakin is at the height of his dueling prowess, along with the fact that his style of fighting, Demso, is good against Maul's Juyo. But the fact that Ahsoka feels confident enough to say this is an indication that she feels like this fight is winnable for her. Which is surprising, as coming into this fight, Ahsoka is the clear underdog. So the fact that it's competitive shows how far she's come since the beginning. The fight then ensues once more. The two again trade strikes with no side gaining any real significant advantage. That is until after some maneuvering, Maul sees a chance to press for a blade lock. The reason he goes for this is that it plays directly towards one of his win conditions. Blade locks in Star Wars are basically an arm wrestle. It always favors the person who is physically stronger. Pretty much every outcome is winning for them. Either they push the opposing blade into the opponent's face or body, which results in a devastating if not fatal wound, or they will ruin the opponent's posture and or balance in an attempt to get out of it, resulting in a potential opening for a fatal strike, or at the very least putting them on the back foot. Regardless of which happens, even just being in the blade lock is beneficial for the person who is physically stronger, as it rapidly drains the endurance of the weaker person trying to resist getting their blade shoved into their face. The longer it goes on, the more free stamina you steal from them, and if that wasn't enough advantages, it's even more beneficial for Maul, as by doing this, he forces Ahsoka to stop moving. Physical strength is obviously something that Ahsoka doesn't particularly excel at. Her biggest strengths are her agility and her dexterity. She utilizes Ataru to leverage these in order to outmaneuver her opponents and look for openings. That is her win condition. But you can't do any maneuvering if you're forced to stay in one spot, or if you're tired. So, making her stand still and stealing her stamina like this, Maul's advantage only gets bigger every second that passes within this blade lock. However, Ahsoka also knows this, so she does not try to win the losing battle that is the blade lock. Instead, she uses a jujitsu-like principle, and turns Maul's strength against him, kicking him above her out of the window with the momentum. The exchange does tire her a bit, but not anywhere near enough to warrant concern. Also, getting kicked out of the window and falling is not really a fun time. So in the end, I think the exchange ends up about even for both sides. The fight picks up again when the two of them are atop some precariously thin steel beams, overlooking the city skylines. This is where Ahsoka is now fighting an extremely uphill battle. Why, you might be asking? Well, the environment the fight is now taking place in directly plays into Maul's win condition. Ahsoka wants space to make use of her agility and dexterity in her Ataru fighting style. Atop these steel beams, there is very little place to move, almost completely restricting any options to outmaneuver your opponent, as any fancy footwork can lead to falling to your death, thereby forcing them both into a more direct, straight-up fight, which is exactly what Maul wants. In this situation, he can fully leverage his strength advantage and heavily apply pressure on Ahsoka. With her normal methods of fighting restricted, just staying in the fight is tough enough, yet along creating openings to win it. So, as the fight continues, you can see what I just mentioned coming into play with Ahsoka dodging an attack from Maul in typical Ataru fashion. However, for doing so, she almost loses her balance on the steel beams and falls. It's a very uncomfortable situation for her, but still, somehow she manages to find a hole in Maul's attack and lands a clean elbow to the chin and an even cleaner kick to the face. Extremely impressive considering the disadvantage she's at. Here she sees what might be her one and only opportunity to end the duel. Considering the circumstances, she goes for it. Maul recovers at an impressive speed however and somewhat easily repels her. So again, the fight is at a somewhat even state, but it being even means that Ahsoka is losing due to the environment that they are fighting in. The longer the duel goes, the more likely it is that Maul will be able to open her up. And as you can see in the next exchange, even though she has the tempo advantage due to Maul having to recover, since she is forced to attack in a very straightforward and honest fashion, Maul very easily blocks them all and directs an attack into a blade lock. As I mentioned before, these are extremely favourable for Maul, and this time Ahsoka has no room to maneuver out of it. He very easily pushes her back and cleanly disarms her with one of her sabers. A very skillful handling of the situation, and now Maul is very clearly winning the engagement. Ahsoka desperately tries to answer back with attempting to sever Maul's hand, but he easily evades this and traps her in yet another blade lock. Again, he easily pushes her back and then disarms her of her last saber. After cleanly disarming Ahsoka twice, Maul even goes as far as to both attack and cut off any place for her to go in the same move. It seems like Ahsoka is pretty much fucked in this situation. However, when Maul goes for the kill, she manages to gracefully evade all his attacks, find a window to catch his saber, and completely reverse the situation by again applying a jujitsu-like principle. This results in her throwing Maul off the steel beams where he would have plunged to his death if she had not caught him. So then, what's the verdict? Well, it's an extremely close fight. If you look at the early fight, it would appear as if Maul had control of it. But then Ahsoka fires back and tags him pretty nicely from a disadvantaged position. For me, the early fight is pretty much even. It's when the fight evolves to atop the steel beams that it's truly telling in my opinion, as there is a very distinctive moment. That being when Maul cleanly disarms Ahsoka of both her sabers. As I mentioned earlier, Disarming someone in most things is considered a hard thing to do and is an indication of a skill gap. However, in the Star Wars universe specifically, it is stated as the highest in the list of skillful ways to end a lightsaber duel. The list goes as the following. The lowest and least skillful thing to do on the list is severing an opponent's arm. An example of this is what Dooku did to Anakin at the end of episode 2. The logic is that it's a way to end the engagement definitively without killing your opponent. It's also considered shameful to let this happen to yourself, as you could potentially never wield a lightsaber again if you can't afford prosthetics. But also, you now have to walk around forever among your peers with this wound. It basically screams at people, yeah, I was so massively skill gapped in my fight that they didn't even have to kill me. They just did me like this, rendering me completely unable to fight back. Very embarrassing indeed. However, while severing an arm is not easy to do, it's still relatively large in comparison to the next thing on the list. So it's not the worst possible shame that you could receive. That shame being getting your hand severed. You can see an example of this in Revenge of the Sith when Anakin fought Dooku for the second time. The principle being the same logic as the arm. However, this is a much smaller target and users are even more aware of protecting it. That's part of the reason why Anakin did what he did to Dooku in the end of that duel, as not only did it end the duel definitively, but also it was a very small personal satisfaction to one-up the Count in a major way for what happened to him on Geonosis. At the top of this list is cleanly disarming your opponent. As of all three, it's by far the hardest way to end the duel. But also, it's the most respectable among the Jedi especially, as not only is it extremely hard to do, also you manage to end the duel without harming your opponent. Maul manages to achieve this, which is extremely impressive. So, did he win the fight? Well, I don't believe you would be wrong if you believe that. In my mind, that is a perfectly fine interpretation and a rational conclusion. However, I think there is an important bit of context that you need to consider before settling on that conclusion, and that being the environment. As I mentioned before, the environment in which the latter part of the duel takes place in heavily favours Maul. It heavily hampers what Ahsoka wants to do and the options available to her, as well as basically forces her to play into exactly what Maul wants her to do, which is a straightforward direct fight. Juyo is literally built for one-on-one direct combat. This combined with the fact that the limited space amplifies Maul's strength advantage as you are forced to block more often rather than evade, and blade locks are easier to initiate. Maul literally couldn't be any more pleased with the situation. So you have to ask yourself, do you think Maul would really be able to get these clean disarms if they were fighting in a more traditional open plane? Meaning that Ahsoka wouldn't be restricted by the environment and would actually be able to fully utilize her Ataru fighting style? Maybe he still would be able to, but I'm a bit unconvinced to be honest. As the fight was pretty even in the beginning, then when he got to the steel beams, despite being at a massive disadvantage, Ahsoka did hold her own for quite a bit, even tagging Maul with that kick to the face. So when you consider the circumstances, a Maul victory isn't as easy a choice as it initially seemed. Plus, there is still one more thing to consider, and that being what happened after the disarm. Despite having no weapons to defend herself with, nor any real room to maneuver, Ahsoka still manages to remain cool, dodging all of Maul's attacks flawlessly, then completely reversing the situation. Maul isn't a pushover, he was going for the kill. To be honest, to be able to do this to him is extremely impressive to me. So when you consider she did this and how well she did in the fight despite having the massive disadvantage, I think it's also fair to say that Ahsoka is the true winner of this fight. That is my personal opinion, but as I said before, I also think that the alternative argument is completely valid and is a fine conclusion if you want to go with that. The goal of this video is to present the information to you guys and let you guys decide which interpretation you want to go with. A friend also told me that he thinks Maul won the duel, but Ahsoka won the fight. I can see how you can rationalize it that way. Personally, as I just said before, I think it's a little flawed because you must consider the environmental advantage, but it's still a solid enough conclusion where I think it's perfectly respectable. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I really love Star Wars dueling and I really love thinking about all the fights like this. I hope that came across and I managed to elevate the awesomeness of this fight as much for you guys as it did for me. I'm interested in knowing, who do you guys think won the fight? Leave your perspective in the comments down below, especially if you have any interpretations that I missed or didn't think of. I'd be very interested in reading them. And please don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more content like this or on any of my other interests. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye bye.